Hey there, and welcome to This Explainer. If you're a focused learner trying to demystify the somewhat complex world of property investment, well, you've landed in the exact right spot. Today, we're tearing down some major myths and looking at the hard facts about a strategy that has literally made and broken countless financial futures. We're talking about the risks of using home equity to invest. It's a move that can absolutely supercharge your wealth, but only if you know exactly what you're doing. So, let's just get right into it.
You know the pitch. If you've got a mortgage, you've probably heard it a dozen times. Your home has grown in value. There's all this equity just sitting there doing nothing. Why not use it to invest and build wealth faster? It's incredibly seductive, right? It sounds super smart and feels like forward momentum. And to be fair, for a lot of folks, tapping into that equity has been the bedrock of a massive property portfolio. But we really need a reality check here, because what those shiny marketing brochures definitely don't tell you up front is what happens when things go south.
So the absolutely crucial point we need to establish right now is this. Equity is not free money. It is debt. It's simply money you're borrowing against your future income to buy something today, and yet it's debt you have to service. When you use it incorrectly, accessing your equity doesn't just slow down your wealth-building journey, it can completely derail the whole shebang. The reality is, that debt doesn't care one bit if your personal circumstances change.
All right, here's our roadmap for today's deep dive. We'll cover the home equity trap, miscalculating your available equity, the cross-collateralisation danger, what happens when leverage spirals out, some crucial precautions for safe investing, and finally, how to protect your financial future.
Let's kick things off with Section 1. The home equity trap and the truth behind that seductive pitch.
Accessing your equity is basically a fork in the road. Down one path, it can be the rock-solid foundation of a thriving portfolio. Down the other, a complete financial disaster. The differentiator here is pure discipline. Let's look at a real-world example from our sources. Imagine a highly disciplined investor back in 2001. They bought a tired, older property for $425,000 using a tiny 5% deposit. They backed their research, put in the hard yards with a renovation, and bam, 9 months later, the property is valued at $700,000. They pulled that new equity out incredibly conservatively with a highly specific purpose and used it to fund their next purchase. They treated that equity as a precision tool, borrowed money with a specific job and a safety buffer. Now, contrast that with investors who treat equity like a lottery win or a giant endless credit card. They draw it out without a strict plan or any kind of stress-tested safety net. And guys, that is exactly how equity morphs into a trap.
Okay, let's dive right into Section 2, miscalculating your available equity and getting to the bottom of the 80% rule.
This is where so many investors drastically overestimate their buying power, often before they've even made an offer. You get your property valuation back and you see a massive number staring at you. Say $400,000 in equity. It's so tempting. Your mind starts racing, planning your next big investment, assuming you have 400 grand of cash ready to deploy. But then you actually sit down with your lender and get hit with the reality that you can't actually spend all of it. Why is that?
Well, it all comes down to the 80% rule. Banks are always going to force you to leave some skin in the game, which is typically 20%. Let's just walk through the math quickly to put this into perspective. If your property is worth $500,000, the bank will only lend up to 80% of that value, so that's $400,000. But hold on, you still have a current mortgage of $100,000 sitting there. When you subtract that existing debt, your real actual usable equity is only $300,000. If you don't run these numbers properly, you might end up committing to a purchase you simply can't fund, missing settlement deadlines, or just completely wiping out your emergency cash buffer.
Moving on to Section 3, the cross-collateralisation danger. This is a hidden structural snare you definitely need to avoid.
This right here is a really sneaky banking structure that catches a ton of beginner investors completely off guard and basically locks up their entire portfolio. Let's define it clearly. Cross-collateralization is when a lender ties all your properties together as combined security for all your loans. It's literally like tying all your ships to a single anchor. So imagine you've got a booming property in Sydney, but you've also got another property in a regional area that unfortunately drops in value. Because the bank looks at your total portfolio value as one big combined pool, that underperforming regional property can actually prevent you from accessing the amazing growth you just built up in your Sydney property.
Now, it might seem super logical at first to just use one lender. I get it, it's convenient, there's less admin, and it feels easier to manage. But it is a deeply flawed approach. The smarter strategy, by far, is to use multiple lenders with separate security. Keep your primary home with one bank so you get that offset account flexibility, and then split your investment properties across different lenders. If you get caught in that flawed single-lender approach, Our source material notes that unwinding cross-collateralisation can literally take a mortgage broker 6 to 8 months. That is a massive agonizing delay that will completely kill your momentum when a genuinely great investment opportunity pops up.
Which brings us to Section 4, when leverage spirals out. This is how even disciplined investors can get caught.
We really need to talk about the worst-case scenario here, because even highly disciplined investors can get themselves in hot water if they don't plan for the unexpected. And this timeline brilliantly illustrates exactly how a totally manageable situation turns into a financial nightmare. Let's say in year 1, you used $300,000 of equity from your Sydney home to buy an investment property up in Brisbane. Cool. But in year 2, interest rates unexpectedly rise by 2%, and suddenly your daily cash flow gets incredibly tight. By year 2.5, that Brisbane property sits vacant for 2 solid months, and rents in the area take a dip. You just can't cover the shortfall anymore. By year 3, you're forced to sell in a soft market. And here's the kicker. Because you leveraged your family home to buy it, you aren't just losing the investment property, you are literally losing the equity in your family home too. That is what it looks like when leverage spirals entirely out of control.
So, let's jump right into Section 5, Precautions for Safe Investing. These are your absolute non-negotiable rules.
So, what precautions should be taken to stop that nightmare from happening to you? Consider this your financial rescue mission. Here's exactly how you can safely leverage without ever gambling your family's baseline security. Honestly, treat these as non-negotiable rules. First off, never, ever max out your line of credit. If you have $300,000 available, draw only 80% of it so you leave a healthy safety buffer. Second, as we just discussed, keep multiple lenders to actively avoid that cross-collateralisation trap. Third, use your equity strategically for highly specific, well-researched purchases. It is definitely not a casual just-in-case fund to dip into. Fourth, you absolutely must stress test your numbers against a 2% interest rate rise and potential tenant vacancies. And finally, never rely on capital growth to service your debt. Your investment property has to generate positive or at least neutral cash flow from day one. Any capital growth should just be a nice bonus, not your financial lifeline.
And our final module, Section 6, protect your financial future by building your ultimate cash buffer. Look, before you even think about talking to a lender or scrolling through property listings online, you need to build the ultimate safety net. Here is a super strict 3-step blueprint for setting yourself up for success. Step 1, calculate the exact gap between what your rental income will cover and what the mortgage is actually going to cost you. Step 2, add a full 2% to your interest rate to properly stress test that gap. Step 3, put aside 6 months of that newly calculated gap upfront, in cash before you borrow a single cent. If nothing goes wrong, awesome, you just don't touch it. But if a tenant leaves or the boiler breaks, you are totally covered. Guys, this isn't about being pessimistic, it's simply about being prepared.
Which brings us directly to the central question we really wanted to focus on for this entire explainer. I want you to honestly ask yourself, can using equity for investing backfire?
The answer is absolutely, big time. But the good news? It really doesn't have to. The difference between the investors who go on to build real generational wealth and those who end up facing financial ruin comes down entirely to discipline, conservative planning, and rigorously applying the strict precautions we've just outlined today. If you respect equity for what it is, borrowed money that absolutely must be repaid, and if you actively build those safety buffers, leverage will safely accelerate your success.
And hey, if you want to make absolutely sure your strategy is bulletproof, you do not have to figure this all out alone. You need to visit PropertyChat.ai for some truly expert property investment guidance. They've managed to consolidate 2 whole decades of real-world property investing, complex mortgage structuring, and renovation experience to help you safely unlock your home's equity without ever risking your ultimate financial security. Seriously, head over to PropertyChat.ai to get started. But before we wrap up today, I'll leave you with this one thought. Is the equity sitting in your home right now a key to your future wealth, or is it just a trap waiting to be sprung? The choice of how you use it is entirely yours. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll see you next time.